Tonight, we travel to a forgotten valley, a place where knowledge was never written but lived. Where the wind carried memory, the trees whispered stories, and fire passed its light from hand to hand. In Hollow Vale, every craft, every song, every silence held a purpose. Here, a young apprentice named Alaric learned the ancient systems that kept the world alive, not through magic but through care. He listened to rivers to find his path. He learned from clay, from smoke, from the quiet of metal cooling after fire. And as the years turned like pages, he discovered the greatest secret of all, that memory itself can be kept alive by kindness, and that light never truly dies, it only changes keepers. So close your eyes. Let the night carry you back to the world before forgetting. This is Hollow Vale, the Circle of Dawn. A story not of endings, but of remembering. The wind had teeth that night. It bit through wool and skin alike as Alaric climbed the last ridge toward the hidden valley. The snowstorm had chased him for 2 days, always just behind, whispering across the frozen moor like a living thing that didn't want him to arrive. His lantern flickered in the wind, each gust threatening to snuff it out. Then at last, through the storm's gray curtain, he saw it, a faint orange glow far below, steady and unwavering. A hearth fire, alive despite the storm's fury. That was Hollow Vale. By the time he reached the first thatched roofs, his fingers were numb and his breath came out in ragged bursts. No guards, no walls, only silence and that warm, steady light coming from the largest hut in the center. He hesitated at the doorway, the cold wind curling around his legs like a warning. Then a voice, calm and deep, called from within. "Enter, traveler. The storm doesn't wait for those who linger." Inside, the heat hit him like a wave. A fire burned at the center of the room, not the wild blaze of pine wood, but a deep, glowing bed of embers that pulsed with slow, living rhythm. The man beside it looked older than stone, wrapped in a wool cloak the color of ash. His eyes reflected the light like molten metal. "You're the boy they sent from the lowlands," the man said. "Yes, master," Alaric managed, shivering despite the warmth. "They told me to find the Keeper of Fire." The old man smiled faintly. "Then you found him. I am Brenner. Sit before you fall." Alaric sank onto the bench near the hearth. The smell of smoke, earth, and something sweet filled the air. He hadn't realized how quiet the place was until now. No crackling wood, no howling wind, only the slow breathing of the coals. "How does it still burn?" Alaric whispered, "after so many days of snow?" Brenner stirred the ashes gently with an iron rod. Beneath the gray, the core glowed brighter, as if listening. "Because it never stopped," he said. "This fire has burned for 73 winters without dying once. When one ember weakens, another feeds it. As long as someone remembers how, the flame endures." Outside, the wind howled against the wooden walls, but in here, the world felt still, as if the storm couldn't reach this circle of warmth. Brenner poured something steaming into a clay cup and handed it to him. "Drink. You'll need strength before dawn." The liquid tasted strange, bitter at first, then warming all the way down to his fingertips. "You came to learn, not to visit," Brenner said quietly. "The path you walk now isn't about mastering the flame. It's about remembering why it matters." Alaric frowned. "Remembering? Yes, you'll see soon enough. But first, tell me, when you were out there in the storm, what kept you walking?" Alaric thought of it, the endless white, the biting wind, the fading light. "The glow," he said finally. "I kept my eyes on the light ahead." Brenner nodded, satisfied. "Then you already understand the first lesson. Fire is not just heat. It's direction. Those who forget that freeze long before their bodies do." For a while, neither spoke. The fire breathed in silence between them. Brenner leaned back and closed his eyes. The people of Hollow Vale survived winters that swallowed kingdoms. Not through strength, but through remembering. Each generation keeps what the last discovered: fire, food, shelter, knowledge, and passes it on in turn. You will do the same. Alaric felt something stir deep in his chest, a flicker of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Outside, the storm began to ease. Snow still fell, but slower now, like ash drifting from the heavens. "You'll sleep by the hearth tonight," Brenner said, rising. "At dawn, your apprenticeship begins." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Before you rest, answer this, boy. When the fire dies in the hearth, does it also die in you? Or can you carry it forward?" The question lingered long after Brenner had gone. Alaric stared into the embers, small, steady hearts of light pulsing against the dark. and wondered if he would ever learn to keep such a thing alive. Outside, the world froze. Inside, one ember burned on. Morning arrived in silence. No bird song, no bells, only the slow sigh of wind over the snowdrifts that sealed Hollow Vale from the world. When Alaric opened his eyes, the hearth was still glowing as though the night had not passed at all. The light was softer now, more amber than gold, and the air carried that same faint sweetness, like honey touched by smoke. Brenner was already awake. He sat cross-legged beside the hearth, his palms held just above the coals, eyes closed. He wasn't warming himself. He was listening. "Good," he said without opening his eyes. "You woke before the embers dimmed. That means you slept close enough to the fire to feel its breath." Alaric rubbed his eyes. "It never went out?" "It doesn't go out," Brenner replied. "It only rests, like us." He gestured for Alaric to come closer. "Look carefully at the glow. Do you see how it moves?" Alaric leaned in. Beneath the gray ash, small rivers of orange light pulsed slowly, flowing and receding like veins beneath skin. "It's alive," Brenner murmured. "Not alive like you or me, but alive all the same. Fire breathes. It hungers. It remembers the hands that shaped it." He took up a small iron hook, lifted one ember the size of a walnut, and placed it into a clay bowl lined with fine ash. Then he covered it with dry moss and blew softly through a hollow reed. The ember deepened in color, dark red to bright. "That," he said, "is how we carry yesterday into tomorrow." Alaric watched in silence, the glow reflecting in his eyes. "But if you leave it uncovered, won't it die?" "It will. So you must learn its language, how to feed it without suffocating it, how to keep it asleep without letting it die. That's why we call it the fire of continuance." He handed Alaric a small bundle wrapped in linen. Inside were 3 kinds of fuel: dried pine needles, soft birch bark, and a pinch of powdered resin. "Each burns differently," Brenner said. "Each has its mood. The pine flares like anger. The birch burns steady, patient. Resin burns slow, fragrant, forgiving. Which would you choose if you wanted to keep someone warm through the night?" Alaric thought for a moment. "The birch," he said finally. Brenner smiled faintly. "Then you understand more than you think." He rose, stretched his back, and stepped toward the door. "Come. You'll see how the village breathes through this fire." Outside, snow glittered like crushed glass under a pale sun. Every home had a small chimney trailing a thin ribbon of smoke into the clear air, the same color, the same rhythm. Alaric realized all the fires were connected, each one lit from Brenner's central hearth. "If this fire dies," Brenner said quietly, "the village forgets how to wake." They walked to the small outbuilding behind the main hall. Inside lay shelves of clay spheres, each one faintly warm. "Fire bundles," Brenner explained. "They hold an ember safe for travel. A family may take one when they journey through the mountains. If they return it unbroken, we know they survived." Alaric reached out and touched one. The clay was rough, almost breathing with heat. "It's alive," he whispered again. Brenner nodded. "Everything that endures must live in some way, even a stone, even an ember." He knelt and began forming a new bundle from damp clay. "Watch closely. This will outlast you if you make it right." Alaric knelt beside him, imitating the movement. The clay was cold at first, then warmed as he shaped it with his hands. Brenner added a handful of ash, whispering words too quiet to catch. "What are you saying?" Alaric asked. "The names of those who tended this fire before me," Brenner said softly. "Each one carried it through their winter. Their breath still lives in the flame." Alaric pressed his thumb into the top of the clay, sealing the ember within. He felt its warmth pulse against his skin like a heartbeat. "How long will it stay alive?" "Months if treated with care," Brenner said. "A year if stored in a dry place. But what matters isn't the ember's life, it's the act of carrying it forward. That is the true memory." They worked in silence for a time, shaping and sealing the bundles, placing them in rows along the shelf. The air smelled of ash and earth and something almost floral, the fragrance of old fires. Outside, the snow softened to mist. "Master," Alaric asked after a while, "what happens if all the keepers die? Who relights the flame then?" Brenner looked at him for a long moment. "Then the wind takes it," he said. "And somewhere, someone who remembers what warmth feels like will make another spark. That's the nature of fire. It never asks permission to begin again." He turned toward the door, pushing it open so that the pale morning light spilled across the floor. "Come, apprentice. Carry this ember with you. We'll give it to the hearth of the East Quarter. It's time you learn how to keep the heart of the village beating." As they stepped outside, the wind rose, gentle now, almost kind. The clay bundle in Alaric's hands felt heavier than its size, its faint warmth steady against his palms. For the first time he sensed something deeper than survival. Continuance. The same flame that had seen kings fall and winters end now pulsed softly between his fingers. He looked at Brenner, who watched him with quiet satisfaction. "Remember," the old man said, "when you hold fire, you hold memory itself." They crossed the snow together, their shadows long and blue in the light. Somewhere in the distance, another chimney began to smoke. The chain continued, one ember to another, one heartbeat to the next. By midday, the snow had softened into slush, and thin sunlight spread over the valley like a shy visitor. Alaric followed Master Brenner up a narrow path behind the eastern cottages. The air smelled of wet pine and melting frost. From here he could see the whole of Hollow Vale, a cluster of rooftops stitched together by smoke, each chimney breathing gently into the sky. They stopped at the edge of the settlement, where a long stretch of tangled hedges grew, thorn, willow, hawthorn, and yew woven into a living wall. "Today," Brenner said, leaning on his staff, "you'll learn how we build what cannot be broken, the wind walls." Alaric frowned. "Walls made of plants? How can that stop anything?" Brenner smiled. "You still think walls must resist? These do not resist. They listen." He placed a hand on the hedge, fingers brushing the cold bark. In this valley, stone walls crumble under frost, wood rots under rain. But branches bend, roots hold. Wind strikes and passes through. The storm exhausts itself and we remain. He beckoned Alaric closer. "Listen." At first, Alaric heard nothing but the ordinary sigh of breeze. Then as he leaned nearer, he noticed the difference. The wind here didn't roar or moan. It whispered, weaving between the leaves like a voice speaking in fragments. The sound was strangely musical. "It hums," he said softly. "Exactly," Brenner replied. The old hedge weavers knew which plants sang to the wind. Each species creates its own tone. Together, they turn chaos into harmony. He handed Alaric a small knife. "Cut one branch cleanly at the joint, then bend it into the weave." Alaric obeyed, feeling the weight of living wood in his hand. The knife sliced through with a soft crack. The scent of green sap rose, sharp and fresh. He pressed the branch into the tangle, following Brenner's example. In, over, under, in again. Soon his fingers were raw, but the pattern began to make sense. "Every cut must heal," Brenner murmured. "Every join must serve." The wall breathes just like fire. As they worked, the wind strengthened. The hedge rustled around them, 1,000 leaves clapping softly together. The sound filled the valley, steady and low, like a distant sea. Brenner raised his face to it, eyes closed. "Hear that? That tone tells us how strong the wind is. When it lowers to a groan, a storm is coming. When it rises to a whistle, snow melts on the mountains." He opened his eyes. "We can feel the seasons through sound alone. That's how we know when to plant, when to mend, when to seal the doors. The wind walls are our calendar." Alaric paused, letting the sound sink in. It was true. The pitch changed subtly with each gust, like breath drawn and released by an unseen choir. "How did they discover this?" he asked. "By listening," Brenner said simply. "Centuries of listening." He took a small vial from his cloak, a liquid the color of amber. "Sap glue," he explained, dripping a little onto the cut ends. "This seals the wound and joins the branches. The tree heals itself and the wall grows stronger." He looked at Alaric. "Everything in this valley lives because it works together. You'll see that in every system we keep. Nothing stands alone." Hours passed in quiet labor. The sun dipped lower, gilding the hedges with light. Alaric's fingers ached, his knees were damp from the snowmelt, but something inside him had shifted. The rhythm of weaving, the hush of the wind, the scent of sap, all of it settled into a single steady pulse in his mind. "Good," Brenner said finally. "You're starting to hear the pattern." As they walked back toward the village, Alaric glanced over his shoulder. The hedge glowed faintly in the dusk, swaying with the wind like a living tide. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "It's alive," Brenner corrected gently. "Beauty fades. Life adapts." They stopped on the ridge overlooking the valley. The wind brushed past their cloaks, soft and cool. Brenner's voice dropped almost to a whisper. Long before walls were built from stone, people understood this, that strength lies in yielding. You can fight the storm or you can shape yourself so it passes through you. Which would you choose? Alaric didn't answer immediately. He thought of the storm that had nearly frozen him 2 nights ago, of the fire that had saved him. To yield, he said finally. Brenner nodded. Then you're learning. For a moment they stood in silence, watching the light fade. The wind brushed through the hedges below, carrying its quiet song into the gathering night, a melody that belonged to no one and everyone at once. When they reached the hearth again, Brenner stooped to stir the coals. Tell me, apprentice, he said softly, when the wind sings against your walls, will you hear threat or harmony? Alaric smiled faintly. Harmony, I think. Then you've already begun to listen. He handed Alaric a bowl of warm broth. Tomorrow you'll meet the keeper of roots. Eat, rest, and remember the sound of today. The wind will test your memory before long. Alaric nodded, sitting close to the fire. Outside, the wind walls whispered and flexed, guarding the valley not with defiance but with grace. By the 3rd morning, the valley had begun to thaw. The snow that once sealed every path now melted into tiny rivulets that trickled through the hedges and sang softly beneath the cottages. Alaric awoke to that sound, a quiet, living heartbeat running beneath the ground. When he stepped outside, Brenner was waiting with a basket and a wooden spade. Today, he said, you'll meet Mistress Etta, the keeper of roots. If the fire is our spirit, her craft is our blood. Without her, nothing in Hollow Vale would endure the winter. They walked through the mist toward the lower meadows. The air smelled of damp soil and thawing moss. Here and there, green shoots already pushed through the dark earth, brave against the lingering chill. Mistress Etta's hut stood half buried in the slope of a hill. Its roof was alive, a mat of grass and herbs that fluttered in the wind. Smoke rose not from a chimney, but from a round hole at the center, carrying the scent of dried roots and honey. Etta herself appeared at the doorway, a small woman with hands stained the color of bark, her gray hair tied in a loose braid. Her eyes were sharp as frost. So this is the boy, she said to Brenner. He looks too soft for dirt. Brenner chuckled. Then the dirt will teach him. Inside, the hut felt like a living heart. Every wall was hung with bundles of herbs, thick roots, twisted vines, bulbs wrapped in cloth. The air was warm, rich, almost sweet. Etta gestured for Alaric to sit by the hearth. Instead of fire, a pot of soil sat over the coals, steaming lightly. The ground, she said, stirring it slowly, is never dead. Even now, under snow, it breathes. Every root keeps memory of the sun. Alaric leaned closer, curious. Within the soil, he could see thin white filaments like threads of light. What are those? He asked. Life between lives, she answered. Roots speaking to roots. The forest beneath our feet. She handed him a small wooden bowl filled with dried pieces, bark, herbs, twisted stems. Sort them, she said. By scent, not by sight. He sniffed one piece, sharp and peppery, another, sweet like fruit left in sun. Pepper root, he guessed for the first. Wild carrot for the second. Etta smiled faintly. Better than most on their first day. You've met the earth before, haven't you? My mother kept a small garden, Alaric said softly. She said the soil listens when you speak kindly to it. Etta nodded approvingly. She was right. The ground remembers our voices longer than we think. She took a small knife and cut open a thick, knotted root. Inside, the flesh glowed faintly gold. This one we call sun marrow. It holds warmth from the summer. Crush it, and the scent alone can wake a fevered man from cold sleep. She handed him the root. Smell it. The fragrance hit Alaric like sunlight through a window, sweet, bright, strangely hopeful. Etta laughed softly. You feel it, don't you? That's stored sunlight. Plants remember what we forget, how to keep the warmth when the world turns cold. She began to hum a low, tuneless melody. Each root sings its own note, she murmured. The trick is learning to listen beneath the soil, to know when to take and when to leave. Brenner, standing quietly by the door, finally spoke. She taught me that when I was your age. I thought she meant poetry. I was wrong. Etta smirked. You always were. She led them outside to the garden. The thawing ground was patterned with small mounds covered in straw and ash. She knelt, brushed one aside, and and exposed a thick network of roots, dark, knotted, alive. "These are last years," she said. "We never pull all of them. We leave a few to whisper to the next generation. That's how the soil remembers what to grow." Alaric watched the delicate strands glisten in the weak sunlight. "You mean, they teach the next plants?" Etta nodded. "Exactly that. Everything teaches something if you're patient enough to listen." She cut one of the thicker roots and wrapped it in damp cloth. "Take this," she told him. "You'll bury it beneath the main hearth. It feeds the fire, the people, the memory." He took it carefully, the weight heavier than he expected. The scent was sharp, grounding, like rain on stone. "Tell me, boy," Etta asked, wiping her hands, "what do you think keeps a village alive through long winters? Fire, food, or faith?" Alaric hesitated. "Maybe memory?" Etta grinned, eyes glinting. "Then you're not as soft as I thought." As they left, the sun broke briefly through the clouds, scattering silver light across the wet fields. The air shimmered, and for a moment Alaric imagined he could see the hidden forest of roots stretching beneath the valley, connecting every tree, every home, every life. Back at the hearth, he buried the sun marrow root beneath the embers as instructed. Brenner watched quietly. "You've begun to understand," the old man said. "Every system feeds another. Fire warms what the earth grows. The earth grows what the fire leaves behind. Nothing ends. It only changes form." Alaric nodded, gazing into the flickering light. The flames burned brighter, their color deepening to a soft gold, as if recognizing what lay beneath. That night, as he drifted toward sleep, he thought he could still smell the scent of warm soil and roots singing quietly under the ground. By the next dawn, a pale mist hung over the valley like breath held too long. The air smelled faintly of wood and salt. When Alaric stepped outside, he found Master Brenner waiting by the path that led toward the far edge of the village. He carried no staff this time, only a small bundle of twine and a knife with a handle darkened by years of smoke. "Today," Brenner said, "you'll learn how to keep what should have died." They walked in silence. The ground was firm now, still cold beneath its crust of frost. Alaric noticed how quiet the village was in the early hours. No hammering, no shouting, only the soft rhythm of distant crows and the whisper of their own steps. At the end of the path stood a long, low building of dark timber. From its roof rose thin ribbons of blue smoke that smelled of birch and applewood. Brenner opened the heavy door and warm, fragrant air washed over them. Inside, the world turned gold. Light filtered through the haze, catching on strings of meat, herbs, and fruits hanging from the rafters. Smoke drifted slowly, curling around everything like invisible hands preserving what would otherwise decay. An older woman stood at the center, stirring a basin of brine with a wooden spoon. Her face was lined and calm, her hair tied back with a strip of cloth. She nodded to Brenner, then looked at Alaric. "So," she said, voice soft but firm, "the boy who keeps the fire now comes to learn how not to waste its breath." "This is Goodwife Adarin," Brenner said. "She guards our smoke." Alaric blinked through the haze. "Guards it?" Adarin smiled faintly. "You think smoke is air gone bad, don't you? But it's more than that. Smoke is time, slowed down until it listens." She handed him a strip of meat wrapped in salt. "Touch this." He obeyed. It was cool and firm, slick with oil. "Now hold it above the coals," she said. "Not in the fire, above it. Let the smoke touch it like a whisper, not a burn." Alaric held the strip carefully over the shallow pit at the room's center. The smoke rose gently, brushing his fingers before wrapping itself around the meat. The scent shifted, first sharp, then sweet, then strangely comforting like old wood after rain. "What do you smell?" Adarin asked. "Wood, salt, and something else," Alaric said. "Something alive." "Good," she nodded. "That's what we chase, the living part of smoke. It carries the memory of trees, the spirit of air and flame. Treat it gently and it will keep what it touches safe for seasons." She moved to a table covered in jars filled with herbs and powders. Sage, juniper, thyme, and something dark she didn't name. Each plant gives a different song," she explained. "Birch for sweetness, oak for strength, juniper for purity. Every flavor is a kind of memory, a way of teaching the body to remember the warmth of summer when winter grows cruel." Alaric watched as she worked. Each motion was measured, the way she lifted the herbs, the careful rhythm of her stirring. It was like a ceremony. "Long ago," she said quietly, We learned that smoke doesn't just preserve food. It preserves essence. We smoke herbs so their scent lasts through winter. We smoke threads so moths forget them. We even smoke paper so words do not fade. She glanced at Brenner. The monks once called it a sin, said we meddled with decay. But decay is only change. We simply slow it down until we can understand it. Brenner smiled faintly. She's been saying that for 40 years. Because it's still true, Adarin replied. She turned back to Alaric. Take this, she said, handing him a thin sprig of thyme. Crush it and throw it into the coals. He did. A burst of fragrance filled the room, sharp and clean. The smoke darkened, then cleared again. See, she said. Every scent has a purpose. That one drives sickness from the air. In this house, the smoke feeds everything, flesh, cloth, spirit alike. Alaric nodded slowly. So the fire breathes, the earth remembers, and the smoke carries both? Adarin looked at him for a long moment. You listen well, boy. Yes. Smoke is what connects what burns and what grows. Between ash and seed, there is always smoke. The lesson lasted until the light began to fade. Together they hung bundles of herbs over the rafters, sealed jars of salted roots, and watched the fire pulse low and steady. The air grew dense but strangely peaceful, as if the room itself had fallen into deep meditation. Before they left, Adarin placed a small smoked apple in Alaric's hands. Its skin was bronzed, the scent rich and warm. Take it, she said. It will keep for months, maybe years. But eat it tonight while it still remembers the fire. Preservation is not just keeping. It's knowing when to let go. Outside, the evening sky was violet, the village chimneys glowing like small lanterns. Brenner said nothing for a long while. Then quietly, you've seen 3 systems now, flame, wind, and root. And today you met time itself. Alaric looked down at the apple in his hands. It was warm, almost pulsing. Time, he repeated softly. I can hold it? For a moment, Brenner said. That's all anyone ever does. The frost returned that night, glittering over the rooftops like a sheet of tiny stars. When Alaric woke, even his breath hung frozen in the air before falling as a faint shimmer of mist. The hearth glowed low, the embers dim but steady, the heart of the house still alive. Master Brenner was already at the door, wrapping his heavy cloak around his shoulders. Come, he said softly. Today we visit the water's heart. You'll learn how the village drinks when the world forgets how to flow. They walked past the wind walls, past the smoking huts and hedges. The snow crunched underfoot, dry and thin as old parchment. Their path wound downward toward the hollow where the oldest wells of the valley lay. The air grew sharper with every step. When they reached the clearing, Alaric saw them. 5 stone circles, their rims glazed with ice, the water below completely still. Each one was crowned with a simple wooden lid etched with faint runes. In the pale light, they looked less like wells and more like sleeping mouths of the earth. Brenner knelt beside the largest one and brushed frost from the carving. These are the frozen wells, he said quietly. When the rivers lock and the streams forget their course, the wells remember. Alaric peered inside. The surface was sealed with a thin layer of glass-like ice. Beneath it, he thought he saw movement, a faint pulse as though something alive breathed far below. They're not frozen solid? He asked. Never, Brenner said. That's the secret. Deep below, the earth keeps its own warmth. But if you open the wells carelessly, that warmth escapes, and then the village thirsts. He took a small stone hammer from his belt and tapped the edge of the ice. It cracked not in a sharp line but in soft concentric rings, each one glimmering with trapped light. You see this pattern? Brenner said. That's how you know the water still sleeps, not dead but dreaming. He handed Alaric a wooden bucket fitted with a rope. Now draw carefully. Do not let the rope twist too fast, or you'll break the layer and lose the well's breath. Alaric nodded and lowered the bucket slowly. The rope creaked, the sound echoing strangely in the hollow air. Then, a quiet splash, distant but certain. He drew the bucket up again, and the water glimmered like glass dusted with silver. Brenner dipped 2 fingers into it. Cold, he murmured, but living. This water remembers sunlight older than you. He handed the bucket to Alaric. Drink. The taste shocked him. Impossibly pure, sweet as melted snow, heavy as stone. It seemed to fill not only his body but his mind, as though it carried echoes of wind and rain from another age. Brenner smiled faintly. You taste the years, don't you? This is what keeps the valley alive. But there's another lesson here. He walked a few paces toward the edge of the clearing, where small stones were arranged in a circle. Each winter we guide the thaw. When the first melt comes, we channel it through warm stones, heat keepers, we call them. They lie buried around the wells, soaking sunlight through summer. By winter, they hold enough warmth to keep a vein of water open underground. Alaric knelt to touch one. Even under snow, the stone was faintly warm. So the wells breathe through these? Yes, Brenner said. Heat, cold, stone, and water, all parts of one system, each remembering the other. He looked at the boy. Tell me, Alaric, what happens if a well freezes solid? It dies. Brenner shook his head. It forgets, and forgetting is far worse. They spent the morning checking each well, tapping the lids gently, listening to the tone of ice. Low hum for safety, hollow echo for warning. Alaric began to recognize the subtle difference. Some lids sang with deep resonance, others quivered faintly like thin glass. Each note told him something of what lived below. When they finished, Brenner sat on a fallen log and handed Alaric a flask of spiced water warmed near the fire. The drink smelled faintly of mint and honey. Do you see now? Brenner asked. We don't fight the cold. We let it slow us down. The secret to survival isn't heat, it's rhythm. The wells breathe slower in winter, faster in spring. So must we. Alaric nodded slowly, letting the warmth spread through his hands. Brenner's gaze softened. In time you'll learn that even in stillness life moves. What appears frozen is only resting. Remember that, and you'll never truly despair. The wind shifted, carrying the distant song of the hedges, a reminder of yesterday's work. Somewhere behind them, a raven called, its voice echoing down the valley like a question. As they began the walk back, Alaric looked over his shoulder one last time. The wells shimmered faintly under the pale sun, breathing small ghosts of vapor into the air. They seemed almost alive, ancient hearts beating just beneath the skin of winter. He found himself wondering what the earth remembered, locked away beneath its frozen skin. That night, as he lay near the hearth, he dreamt of water running under ice, quiet, patient, endless, waiting for the right warmth to rise again. By the time the sun returned, the snow had melted into rivulets running along the paths like silver threads. The air in Hollow Vale felt lighter, cleaner, as if the village itself had taken a long, deep breath. That morning, Brenner sent Alaric to the western fields to find Mistress Rosewin, a woman the villagers called the Listener of Leaves. She'll teach you to hear what trees never say aloud, Brenner told him. Follow the sound, not the road. Alaric smiled uncertainly, unsure what that meant. But as he stepped beyond the cottages, he heard it, a faint hum, somewhere between a whistle and a sigh carried by the wind. He followed that sound through the meadow until he reached a wide hedge that shimmered slightly in the breeze. Mistress Rosewin stood there, tall and spare, wrapped in a cloak woven with patterns of vine and feather. Her hair was streaked with silver, her face lined but serene. She turned before he could speak, as if she had heard his thoughts through the rustling branches. You've come to listen, she said. Good. The hedges have been waiting for new ears. The sound surrounded him, low, melodic, layered like a chorus. It's beautiful, he murmured. Rosewin smiled. That is only one of their voices. Listen longer and you'll hear the others. She led him closer to the hedge, a living wall of hawthorn, willow, and beech woven so tightly together it looked like a single organism. The air trembled with its whispering. Every hedge in Hollow Vale sings, she said. They were planted not just to keep animals out, but to tell us what the sky intends. She plucked a dried seed pod from a branch and crushed it between her fingers. When the pods click, rain will follow within the day. When they fall silent, frost is near. The trees know before we do, their roots taste what our eyes can't see. Alaric tilted his head, listening harder. The song changed with every gust, low when the air was still, rising to a lilting tune when the wind gathered speed. How can you tell what it means? He asked. Rosewin smiled faintly. Each tone belongs to a season. You'll learn them the way you learn words, one by one until they speak to you. She took a narrow reed from her belt and held it like a flute. This helps me find their key. She blew once, and the sound blended perfectly with the hedge's song. The wind shifted, and suddenly the entire wall seemed to answer her, a wave of whispers cascading through the leaves. Alaric felt a chill of awe. It's alive. Alive, yes, Rosewind said softly. But more than that, aware. These hedges catch the smallest tremors of air. When a storm is coming, they begin to murmur. When snow approaches, they tighten their leaves. You can feel the weather in their breath if you listen closely enough. She gestured toward the field stretching beyond. Long ago, travelers could walk blindfolded through this valley, guided only by the songs of hedges and rivers. Sound told them where they were, and where they were safe. She paused, watching Alaric's expression. You people of fire forget that silence is a kind of blindness. Her words stayed with him. He stood still, trying to separate each sound. The hiss of the grass, the sigh of the hedge, the faint crack of branches shifting. Slowly, he began to notice the difference in tone as the wind turned. The higher notes seemed to come from the younger branches, the lower hum from old wood grown thick and hollow. It's like a choir, he whispered. Rosewind nodded. A choir of seasons. Every voice has its part. The trick is not to silence them with your own noise. For the next hour, she guided him through a series of exercises, listening with eyes closed, naming each sound he heard, then guessing its direction. Sometimes she would move a branch or whisper into the leaves, asking, "Do you hear what changed?" At first, he missed the subtleties, but gradually the music of the hedge unfolded, a symphony of tone and rhythm that mapped the very breadth of the valley. When the wind shifted again, carrying a sharper chill, Rosewind tilted her head. Hear that note rising under the others? The hollow one. Alaric nodded slowly. Snow by morning, she said simply. They sat by the hedge as evening deepened. The setting sun burned red through the lattice of branches, turning every leaf into a small window of light. Rosewind reached down and drew a small pattern in the soil, a spiral surrounded by lines. This is how we read them, she explained. The spiral marks the core of the hedge, the still point where all movement rests. The lines show where the wind passes like threads through cloth. Together, they form the pattern of the season. She looked at him closely. The same wind that can destroy a roof can also carry a warning if you listen. The same branch that bends can teach you when to shelter and when to wait. The difference between ruin and refuge, she smiled, is attention. When Alaric returned to the village, night had fallen. The air was full of that low, haunting hum, the valley's lullaby before snowfall. Brenner was waiting by the hearth, carving something from wood. Well, he asked. She taught me to listen, Alaric said simply. Brenner chuckled. Then you're ready for silence. That's where true hearing begins. The fire cracked softly, the room warm against the gathering cold. Outside, the hedges sang their wordless warning to anyone who cared to listen. Alaric lay awake long into the night, hearing that song in his dreams, the voice of leaves speaking in a language older than words. The morning after the snowfall, Hollow Vale lay hushed beneath a white silence so deep it seemed the world itself was holding its breath. Smoke rose from the chimneys in slow curls, and every sound, a door closing, a dog barking in the distance, felt softened, cushioned by the snow. Alaric followed Master Brenner along a narrow path cut through the drifts. The old man's staff pressed deep into the powder, leaving small circular marks that quickly filled with flakes again. Today, he said, you'll meet Mistress Hildra, Keeper of Clay. She teaches patience to fire and memory to earth. They crossed the frozen stream, where water whispered beneath the ice, and approached a squat stone building half buried in the hill. The air smelled faintly of wet soil and ash. Inside, the warmth hit Alaric like a slow wave, humid, heavy, full of the scent of minerals and smoke. Rows of pots lined the walls, some still damp, others glowing faintly orange from the kiln's mouth. Every surface bore the marks of hands, fingerprints, ridges, the sweep of palms. It was as if 100 quiet conversations had been pressed into the clay and left to dry. Mistress Hildra sat near the hearth, turning a small bowl in her hands. Her hair was bound in a knot streaked with gray and red. Her fingers were caked in drying earth. So, she said without looking up, you're the boy who listens to water and fire. Alaric hesitated. I try to. Then you'll learn to listen to silence, she said simply, and placed the bowl aside. She led him to a workbench covered in lumps of clay, each one wrapped in damp cloth. The earth here remembers everything, she said. The feet that walk it, the rain that softens it, even the bones that sleep beneath it. Clay is time made visible. She unwrapped one lump and placed it before him. Press your hand here. He obeyed, feeling the cool, living weight beneath his palm. Now lift it. His handprint remained perfect, detailed. That, Hildra said, is the first lie of clay. It remembers everything but not forever. If you do nothing, the mark fades. If you fire it too soon, it cracks. Memory must be dried slowly. She guided his hands to knead the clay. The texture changed with every motion, sticky, then pliant, then smooth like warm skin. Feel that? She asked. That's the clay learning who you are. He smiled faintly. It feels alive. It is, she said. Every handful was once part of a riverbed, part of a mountain. Carries the voice of what it was. If you listen, you'll hear where it came from. They worked in silence for a long while, the only sounds the slow rhythm of kneading and the soft hiss of steam from the kiln. The room glowed amber in the firelight. The clay took shape beneath Alaric's hands, a small vessel, plain but balanced. When it was done, Hildra nodded. Now you must give it memory. She handed him a fine stick and a small pot of black pigment. Scratch into it what you wish to remember. Alaric hesitated. Anything. Anything worth keeping, she said, but choose carefully. Clay listens deeply. He thought for a long moment, then etched a small spiral into the vessel's side, the same pattern Mistress Rosewind had drawn in the soil the day before. Hildra smiled when she saw it. Ah, the spiral of breath. Good choice. That symbol remembers movement. When you fire it, the mark will outlive you, if you burn it right. She lifted the vessel gently and placed it beside the others near the kiln. Now, she said, we wait. Hours passed. The flames licked the kiln's mouth, glowing gold and red. The air thickened with the scent of burning pine. Occasionally, the clay would pop softly like sighs escaping. Hildra spoke again, her voice low. We fire not just to harden. Fire seals what memory would lose. It turns water into stone, time into permanence. But too much heat and it forgets again. Alaric watched the colors inside shift from red to white, the light pulsing like the heartbeat of the earth itself. He could almost feel the clay changing, whispering its story through the fire. When they finally drew the vessels out, the surface of his small bowl shone with faint iridescence, the spiral dark against its pale body. It's beautiful, he whispered. It's patient, Hildra corrected gently. Beauty is only patience made visible. She handed him the cooled vessel. When you drink from it, remember, everything you hold will one day return to the soil. The only question is what memory it will carry back. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, soft, lazy flakes spinning in the twilight. Alaric held the vessel close to his chest. The clay was still warm, faintly pulsing with the memory of fire. Brenner met them by the door, his beard dusted with snow. So, what did you learn? Alaric smiled. That even silence remembers. Brenner's eyes glinted. Then you've begun to understand the village. That night, lying near the hearth, Alaric placed the clay bowl beside his bed. As he drifted toward sleep, he imagined the earth beneath Hollow Vale whispering, every vessel, every wall, every footprint murmuring stories to one another beneath the frozen ground. The clay of memory still speaking even in silence. The thaw had deepened. Days grew longer, the air softer. Along the southern fields, the snow receded first, uncovering tufts of grass the color of tarnished gold. It was there, among the early blooms, that Alaric followed Brenner once more, to the edge of the orchard, where an old woman in a sun-colored shawl tended to rows of wooden hives. She worked slowly, her movements graceful, deliberate. Around her drifted a faint hum, not loud but constant, like the valley itself was breathing. Brenner stopped a few paces away. Mistress Etta of the apiary, he said softly. She keeps the bees and the rhythm of the seasons. The woman turned, her lined face bright with calm. So this is the boy who listens to fire and clay. Alaric nodded, uncertain. I'm learning. Her eyes sparkled. Good. The bees love listeners. She motioned for him to come closer. At first, he hesitated. The air shimmered with wings, thousands of them, darting in golden arcs around the hives. Yet not one touched him. The hum seemed to part for his presence, as though measuring his intent. Don't fear them, Etta said. Fear separates. Bees can smell it. What do they smell instead? Alaric asked. Truth, she said simply, and calm. She lifted the lid of a hive. Inside, hundreds of bees moved over the wax in smooth, synchronized waves, their bodies glowing like molten bronze in the sunlight. The scent was warm and rich, honey, pollen, wood, and something deeper that felt alive. This, she whispered, is breath made visible. Every hive breathes as one. If it stops, the valley sickens. Alaric leaned closer, watching in wonder. It's like they're singing. Etta smiled faintly. They are. Each hive has its own tone. The sound tells me how they fare. A low hum means hunger. A restless buzz, too much heat. But this, she closed her eyes. This is peace. For a moment, Alaric tried to listen beyond the sound itself, to feel it. The hum vibrated through his chest, deep and even until it matched his heartbeat. He exhaled slowly, letting it align with his breath. The bees seemed to respond, their rhythm shifting slightly to meet his. Etta opened her eyes. You felt it, didn't you? He nodded, dazed. Good. The bees teach the oldest lesson, harmony through difference. Each one moves for itself, yet none survive alone. She guided him to a nearby bench carved from a single tree trunk. Sit, she said. Watch them. He obeyed. Time passed differently in the apiary, not in minutes or hours, but in movement and light. Bees drifted in and out of the hives like living sparks. Others clustered near the entrance, fanning their wings in perfect unison to cool the brood inside. They breathe for the hive, Etta said. That's why we call it the breath of bees. Each wing beat moves air through the honeycomb, keeping the temperature steady. Too cold, the brood dies. Too hot, the wax melts. So they adjust, thousands of tiny hearts working toward one balance. She handed him a small comb dripping with amber honey. Taste it. The sweetness filled his mouth instantly, bright, floral, alive. It tastes like sunlight, he said. Etta laughed softly. Exactly. The bees drink the sky and feed the earth. Everything they make is an echo of what they've gathered. Their honey is not food, it's memory. Brenner, who had been standing silently by the fence, finally spoke. The hive remembers every flower, every wind. That's why each season's honey tastes different. Etta nodded. The spring honey hums of dandelion and willow. The midsummer one sings with lavender and thyme. Even the bee's hum changes with the season. Listen long enough and you can tell the month by sound alone. Alaric tilted his head, hearing the subtle rise and fall of tone. So they keep time, he said. They are time, Etta replied. The world forgets itself when the bees fall silent. No bees, no bloom. No bloom, no bread. We are bound together, though we pretend otherwise. She reached into one of the hives and drew out a small wax disc, smooth and faintly warm. Take this, she said. It's beeswax from the winter hive. Smell it. Alaric did. The scent was soft, earthy, comforting. That, Etta said quietly, is the smell of endurance. Every candle you light, every seal you make carries that patience. Bees don't hoard, they prepare. A lesson most men forget. As they left the orchard, the hum followed them like a lullaby. The sun hung low, bathing the valley in honey-colored light. Alaric glanced back once more at the hives, glowing faintly in the dusk. They never stop, he murmured. No, Brenner said. And neither should you, but learn to move softly as they do. Progress without harmony is noise. That night, as Alaric lay near the dying fire, he thought he could still hear it, the low hum beneath the silence of sleep, like the valley itself breathing through thousands of tiny wings. It wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It simply was steady, eternal, patient. He fell asleep to that rhythm, the breath of bees carrying him gently into dreams. Spring came quietly to Hollow Vale. The last of the frost melted into dark earth, and the streams began to murmur again beneath the hedges. The air smelled of rain and something new, a brightness that seemed to hum beneath every breath. One morning, Brenner handed Alaric a bundle of linen and a curious smile. You've learned how Earth remembers, he said. Now you'll see how light remembers too. Go to the southern kiln. Ask for Master Corin. The kiln stood apart from the village, near a bank of pale sand where the stream once ran dry. The air shimmered with heat even from afar. When Alaric arrived, he found a tall, thin man seated before the flames, his sleeves rolled high, his hair streaked white by years of heat. His eyes were sharp, reflecting the fire like two fragments of molten glass. So, the man said without turning, the apprentice who listens to clay has come to learn how to trap light. Alaric blinked. Trap it? Corin smiled faintly. That's what glass is, caught sunlight tamed by flame. He gestured to the sand piled beside him. "It begins here, in dust so fine it remembers every tide and wind that shaped it. Heated enough and it forgets what it was, long enough to become something new." He scooped a handful of sand and let it fall slowly between his fingers. The grains shimmered in the light like tiny stars. "Every piece is ancient," he said softly. "Bits of mountains, rivers, and time. The oldest thing you can hold, and yet it makes the youngest material on earth." Alaric watched as Corin poured the sand into a clay crucible and slid it into the heart of the fire. The heat was so intense it blurred the air, turning everything to a golden haze. "Now," Corin said, "we wait for forgetting." Minutes passed, or perhaps hours. Time inside the kiln seemed to move differently, like the world outside had faded away. The sand began to glow, dull red, then orange, then white. It softened, sagged, shimmered like thick honey. "This," Corin whispered, "is the most fragile moment. Transformation is always a kind of surrender." He drew the molten mass out on a rod, turning it slowly so it would not collapse. The glow bathed his face in amber light. "It looks alive," Alaric murmured. "It is. For a few breaths, it remembers being fire and sand both. Then it forgets again and becomes glass." Corin blew gently into the rod. The glowing sphere expanded, trembling like a bubble of captured dawn. Its color shifted from gold to clear silver as it cooled. "You see," he said, "every piece of glass holds the ghost of what it was, and the light of what it has seen. That's why we use it for windows, lenses, mirrors. It teaches us to look both outward and inward." He placed the rod aside, letting the sphere rest on a smooth stone. "But glass also breaks," Alaric said quietly. Corin nodded. "Yes, because truth is fragile. Transparency always is. That's its lesson. Not everything bright is unbreakable." He handed Alaric a cooled shard from the table. In the light, it shimmered faintly blue. "Hold it up," he said. Alaric lifted it to his eye. The world beyond turned softer, haloed, the edges glowing faintly. "That color," Corin said, "comes from ash in the fire, from imperfection. Without it, glass would be blind." Alaric turned the shard over in his hand. "So flaws make it see?" "Exactly," Corin smiled. "A perfect lens shows nothing. Only when touched by the world does it begin to reveal." He led Alaric outside to a small structure built entirely from colored glass panes. Sunlight streamed through them in ripples of crimson, green, and gold, washing the interior with living color. "This," Corin said, "is the memory house. Each pane comes from a different fire. Together they hold every hue of the valley, river blue, forest green, honey gold. When the sun passes through, it retells the seasons." They stood silently as the light shifted with the clouds, turning the air around them into liquid color. "Glass doesn't store warmth," Corin murmured. "It stores radiance. That's how we remember beauty, not by holding it but by letting it pass through." As the day waned, he handed Alaric a small pendant, a droplet of glass the size of a tear, strung on a leather cord. Inside, a faint swirl of gold seemed to drift eternally. "Keep this," Corin said. "It will remind you that knowledge, like glass, is only clear when light passes through it." Brenner met him on the road back to the village. The sunset caught the pendant, scattering a spark across the snow. "So," he asked, "what did the glassmaker teach you?" Alaric smiled softly. "That light remembers everything we try to forget." That night, as the fire dimmed and shadows spread across the walls, Alaric watched the pendant glow faintly in the dark, a captured breath of sunlight, still alive. The morning came with a hush that wasn't silence, but rather the sound of things preparing to move. The wind had changed. It brushed through the hedges like fingers across a harp. The air tasted of thaw and distance, carrying with it the scent of rivers and salt from lands unseen. Alaric was helping Brenner mend the thatch when the old man paused, tilting his head toward the breeze. "Do you hear it?" he asked. Alaric listened. "The wind." "Not just wind," Brenner said. "A message. You should visit Mistress Lyra today. She reads what the sky writes." She lived at the edge of the moor, in a small round house with walls made of woven reeds that whispered when the breeze passed through them. From afar it looked like her cottage breathed. As Alaric approached, he saw colorful strips of cloth fluttering from poles around her garden, each one trembling in a different rhythm. Mistress Lyra stood barefoot in the grass, arms raised as though greeting an invisible guest. Her hair blew wildly in every direction, streaked with white and gold. When she turned to him, her smile was quick and bright as lightning. "You must be Brenner's boy," she said. "I felt your footsteps in the air before you arrived." Alaric hesitated. "You felt them?" Lyra nodded, eyes gleaming. "Air carries memory just like clay or water. Every movement leaves a trace, a ripple in the breath of the world." She motioned him closer. "Today you'll learn to weave the wind." Around her cottage hung dozens of strange instruments, frames of thread, wooden chimes, hollow reeds strung between poles. As the breeze moved, each one sang in a different tone. The sound wasn't chaotic. It was music, faint, distant, but undeniably alive. "What are they?" Alaric asked in wonder. "My looms," Lyra said. "But instead of yarn, I use air. I catch the invisible." She placed his hands on a thin frame strung with silver thread. "This one listens to the northern wind. Feel it?" He nodded. The thread quivered faintly beneath his fingers. "It's cold?" "Yes," Lyra said. "Cold and wise. It carries the scent of faraway stones. Every direction has a personality. North is patience, east is curiosity, south is passion, west is memory. When they meet, they weave the seasons." The wind shifted, brushing against their faces. Lyra closed her eyes. "That was east," she murmured. "Young, restless, full of rain." For a while they stood in silence. The wind changed again, stronger now, playful. It caught Alaric's hair, tugged his cloak, filled his lungs. "It feels alive," he said softly. "It is alive," Lyra whispered. "We just forget to greet it." She handed him a length of thin linen dyed pale blue. "Every spring, we weave one cloth to hang at the village edge. It tells us how the year will unfold. Watch closely." She tied the cloth to a pole, then stepped back. The breeze caught it at once, making it dance, sometimes twisting, sometimes billowing, sometimes falling still. Lyra watched intently. "The movement tells the tale," she said. "A steady rhythm means gentle weather. Sudden turns, storms ahead. See that flicker?" The cloth twisted sharply, then settled again. "That," she said quietly, "is a warning. Not danger, just change." Alaric watched the fabric shimmer. The pattern of its motion seemed to match his breathing, slow, then quick, then calm again. He realized the air around him wasn't empty space. It was presence, unseen but deeply felt. Lyra smiled as if she'd read his thoughts. "Good. You're beginning to feel it. The wind isn't soundless. It speaks through everything that moves. A reed bent in one direction means dry air. A branch trembling means moisture. We read the invisible like others read ink." She walked to a small table and unrolled a cloth map covered in tiny stitches. "This," she said, "is last year's wind. Each color marks a different tone. Blue for cold fronts, gold for warm breezes, green for storms that carried pollen from the far south. Every line is a memory of motion." Alaric traced the embroidery with his finger. "It looks like rivers." Lyra nodded. "Exactly. But rivers of air. The same breath that once touched the sea now brushes your face. Everything that moves connects us." The afternoon light turned honey-colored. Lyra gathered the fluttering cloth from the pole and folded it carefully. "The wind teaches what all systems do," she said softly. "Balance without stillness. Strength without resistance. If you try to hold it, it dies. But if you move with it," she gestured toward the horizon, "it carries you farther than any road." Before Alaric left, she handed him a small reed whistle. "Blow this only when you're lost," she said. "It doesn't call for help, it calls for calm. The wind will answer." As he walked back through the meadows, the breeze rose again, brushing past his ear like a whisper of farewell. He wondered if the valley itself had heard their lesson. That night, as he lay beside the dying fire, he listened. The air moved gently through the cracks in the walls, sighing across the clay bowl and flickering the flame. The house seemed to breathe with him, slow, patient, alive. And somewhere outside, the reeds of Mistress Lyra's garden sang softly, weaving the night. The morning after the storm, Hollow Vale smelled of rain and wood smoke. The air was cool, clean, and strangely hollow, as if the sky had spent all its breath. Charcoal dust lay in faint streaks along the paths, reminders of the lightning that had split the ridge the night before. Brenner stood by the doorway, eyes fixed on the dark plume rising from the eastern edge of the valley. "The charcoalers will be at work," he said. You've learned fire's birth. Now you'll see its afterlife. They followed the black trail of smoke to a clearing where the trees grew stunted and the earth was dark as ink. A ring of low mounds smoked gently, earthen domes breathing thin gray ribbons into the morning air. Nearby, a man worked with quiet precision, guiding the smoke with a long iron rod. His face was streaked with soot. His hands, though blackened, moved with a craftsman's grace. "This," Brenner said, "is Master Dunrick, keeper of the ash." The man nodded once, eyes bright beneath the soot. "Another student?" he asked. "Of the living systems," Brenner replied. "Then he's ready," Dunrick said simply. He beckoned Alaric closer. The heat hit like a wall, not burning but deep, steady, the warmth of earth itself breathing out. "This is a charcoal mound," Dunrick explained. "Wood that's been half burned, half preserved. The art is in the balance." He jabbed his iron rod into one mound, releasing a thin puff of smoke. Too little air and it dies. Too much and it turns to ash. The trick is to teach the fire to forget its hunger. Alaric watched as Dunrick shifted soil over one mound and uncovered another. Beneath the thin crust of earth, the wood glowed dull red, veins of ember pulsing like a sleeping heart. "How long does it burn?" Alaric asked. "As long as it remembers," Dunrick said. 3 days, sometimes 5. Then we open it and what remains is not death, but transformation. He took a blackened branch and snapped it clean in two. Inside, the wood gleamed metallic gray, smooth, light, silent. "Charcoal," Dunrick said. "Fire captured in stillness. It burns hotter, cleaner, longer. Like knowledge refined by patience." He handed the piece to Alaric. It was featherlight, yet left a faint mark on his palm, a soft trace of black dust. "Ash stains everything it touches," Dunrick said. "But look closely." Alaric lifted the charcoal to the light. The gray surface reflected a faint shimmer like glass dust. "See," Dunrick said softly. "Fire's memory. Every spark that ever touched it leaves a mirror behind." He gestured toward a shallow pit filled with fine white ash. "This," he continued, "is the mirror of ashes. What's left after everything else has forgotten itself. Most think it's useless, but they're wrong." He scooped a handful and let it fall slowly through his fingers. The ash drifted weightlessly, catching the light like powdered pearl. In this dust lie minerals, salts, and memories of every flame that ever lived. Mix it with water and you have soap. Mix it with clay and you have glass. Mix it with soil and the crops grow stronger. Nothing that burns is wasted. Brenner nodded quietly. "We burn to renew," he said. Dunrick smiled faintly. "Exactly. The world builds itself from what it destroys. Fire devours, but ash restores. That's the cycle." He led Alaric to a small hut nearby. Inside, bundles of charcoal hung from the rafters like black fruit. On a table lay patterns drawn with ash on wooden boards, spirals, lines, circles intersecting. "These are the breathing marks," Dunrick explained. "We read the flow of smoke to know if the mound lives well. Every column of smoke tells a story. Thick means damp wood. Blue means heat trapped below. Pale gray means perfection, a fire content with its work." Alaric traced one of the ash spirals with his finger. "It feels alive," he said. Dunrick nodded. "Ash is what remains when everything else lets go. The most faithful witness of all. It holds no flame, yet remembers every burn." He took a clay jar from the shelf and filled it with a small amount of fine ash. "Take this," he said. "When your fire burns too fiercely, sprinkle a pinch upon it. It will remind the flames to be humble." Alaric accepted the jar reverently. The dust was soft, almost warm. "Remember this lesson, boy," Dunrick added. "Every craft, every mind must learn to cool itself. Passion without pause becomes ruin." The sun was sinking when they began the walk home. The wind carried faint traces of wood smoke and earth. The scent of endings turned to beginnings. As they neared the village, Brenner broke the silence. "So," he asked, "what did the charcoal master teach you?" Alaric thought for a moment. "That even what's burned can still give life." Brenner smiled. "Then you've learned the oldest wisdom of all." That night, Alaric sat beside the hearth, holding the clay jar of ash. The fire crackled softly, its light warm but restrained. He sprinkled a little of the ash onto the coals. The flames bent lower, calmer, as if remembering something ancient. The air filled with a faint sweetness. Not smoke, not wood, but peace. And in that stillness he understood what Brenner meant long ago. The world builds itself not from what it keeps, but from what it releases. Winter's breath returned quietly, not with storms this time, but with a hush that settled over Hollow Vale like a waiting thought. The snow glimmered faintly under the pale moon, and every roof seemed to hold its own pool of light. 4 days, the villagers had been preparing, sweeping the square, hanging lanterns from the hedges, polishing the stone at the base of the elder oak. When Alaric asked what the celebration was for, Brenner only smiled. "It's the night of remembering," he said, "the oldest of our gatherings. You've seen the systems of the Vale. Tonight you'll see the thread that binds them." By dusk, the air was alive with anticipation. Children carried baskets of pine cones to feed the fires, while women lit beeswax candles scented with juniper and honey. The scent filled the square, sweet, earthy, eternal. Beneath the elder oak, torches burned in a wide circle, their flames trembling like golden petals. The elders gathered first, dressed in simple cloaks of woven wool, each bearing a small token of their craft. A clay vessel, a sprig of herbs, a polished stone, a strip of colored glass. When the final bell sounded from the chapel, silence fell. Master Brenner stepped into the circle and raised his staff. "Tonight," he said, voice deep and steady, "we speak what must not be written. We remember the living systems that keep us whole. Fire that breathes, clay that listens, water that dreams, wind that teaches, ash that forgives." The villagers murmured in response, repeating the final words like a prayer. "Ash that forgives." Then Mistress Rosewind, the listener of leaves, stepped forward. She held a branch of hawthorn, green even in winter. "We begin with sound," she said softly, "the language of the living world." From the shadows, children began to hum, low, steady tones that wove through the crowd like drifting mist. Their song rose and fell in the rhythm of wind through branches. Behind them, others added faint percussion, wooden sticks tapping the ground, a heartbeat echoing the earth itself. Alaric closed his eyes. It felt less like music and more like breathing, as if the whole valley exhaled through them. Next came Mistress Hildra, the clay keeper. She carried a small bowl and filled it with water from the well. "Earth meets breath," she said. "To hold memory one must be still." She dipped her fingers into the bowl and drew spirals upon the ground. The firelight caught the wet marks, making them shine like living symbols. Then the beekeeper, Mistress Etta, approached with a lantern made of golden wax. Inside, the flame flickered warm and soft. "The hive speaks through unity," she whispered. "No life stands alone." She placed the lantern beside the bowl, the light reflecting in the water like a second, smaller moon. Brenner turned to Alaric. "Go," he said gently. "Each apprentice adds their mark." Heart pounding, Alaric stepped into the circle. The villagers watched silently as he drew from his satchel the small glass pendant given by the glassmaker. He held it toward the fire, and it caught the light, scattering tiny rainbows across the faces around him. "I bring light," he said quietly, "that which passes through but remains unchanged." A murmur of approval rippled through the gathering. The colors danced briefly across the elder oak's bark, green, gold, and violet, fading like memory. Then the singing began in earnest, a sound deep and layered, passed down through generations. Each verse named a craft, a season, a system of the valley. Fire remembers its embers, water its path. Clay keeps the touch of hands long gone, and air carries every breath we have ever shared. Voices joined in, low and rhythmic, until even the trees seemed to hum along. Some wept quietly, others smiled through tears. The song wasn't sad, it was reverent, a promise spoken into the dark. As the music swelled, the elders began to move in a slow circle, each placing their craft at the center, a living altar of memory. The air shimmered with heat and light, the smell of resin, herbs, and honey thick as a dream. Then silence again. Only the crackle of fire and the whisper of wind through the oak's ancient branches. Brenner spoke once more. "Knowledge does not live in parchment or stone. It lives in hands and songs and breath. So long as we remember, we survive." He turned to Alaric, his eyes reflecting the fire. "Tomorrow you'll begin to learn the remembering, how memory passes from tongue to tongue, until time itself becomes our library." When the torches burned low, the villagers stayed, sitting in quiet clusters, speaking softly or simply listening to the night. The stars above seemed unusually bright, as if drawn closer by the song. Alaric lingered near the fire long after others had gone. The bowl of water still glimmered, the wax lantern still breathed its soft glow. In their reflection he saw not his own face but many generations behind him, watching, waiting, whispering the same vow. We remember so that nothing is truly lost. He stayed there until dawn began to pale the sky, the embers fading to soft ash, the final color of memory. The morning after the night of remembering dawned pale and quiet. The valley seemed to rest after its song. Snow melted slowly in the light, and smoke rose from the hearths like soft ribbons of breath. Hollow Vale for once did not hurry. Even the wind moved gently, as if afraid to disturb the stillness left behind. Alaric awoke to the sound of distant bells, not church bells but smaller ones, made of clay and strung along the elder oak's lowest branches. They rang only once a year, Brenner had told him, to summon the apprentices. He dressed quickly and followed the faint chiming into the square. The villagers were already gathering, their cloaks dusted with frost. The fire from the night before had been rekindled, burning low and blue. Around it stood the 7 masters, keepers of fire, water, wind, earth, smoke, clay, and sound. Brenner motioned for Alaric to join them. "Today," Brenner said, his voice carrying softly through the cold air, "we renew the chain of voices. What was sung last night becomes spoken. What is spoken becomes remembered. And what is remembered endures." The villagers bowed their heads. Then Mistress Rosewind, the listener of leaves, stepped forward with a bundle of reeds bound by twine. "Every voice must find its echo," she said. "Each keeper passes their song to one who will live beyond them." She handed the bundle to a young girl no older than 10. The child looked terrified at first, but Rosewind knelt and whispered something into her ear. The girl nodded, inhaled deeply, and began to hum, softly at first, then stronger. The tone wavered, then steadied. The masters joined in, blending their voices until the air vibrated with warmth. "Every word here," Brenner murmured to Alaric, "has been sung for centuries. No parchment holds it. The melody itself is the book." He gestured toward the fire. "You will add your first line today." Alaric's heart thudded. "Me?" "Yes," Brenner said. "The system of fire preservation. You learned it from Wulfik's teachings. Now you speak it in your own rhythm. So the chain continues." The others stepped back. Alaric moved closer to the blue flame. The crowd quieted. He felt the weight of their eyes, not as judgment but as expectation, a silence asking to be filled. He drew a slow breath. Then, as Brenner had taught him, he spoke not to the people but to the flame itself. "Fire sleeps when fed with care. A spark lives longer in patience than in hunger. Ash forgives. Smoke remembers. Flame is breath made bright." The words left his mouth steady but low, falling into the rhythm of the wind. The fire stirred as though listening. The crowd murmured in approval. Mistress Hildra, the clay keeper, nodded. "He speaks like one who has burned and survived," she said softly. Brenner smiled faintly. "Then let the chain be sealed." From within his cloak, he drew a small piece of woven thread, dark red, braided with silver. He tied it gently around Alaric's wrist. "This thread binds your voice to ours," he said. "A promise to remember and to be remembered." The villagers began to hum again, low and continuous, like the earth itself singing beneath their feet. The sound swelled, spreading from the circle of masters outward until every person in the square had joined, children, elders, even the animals standing near the hedge walls. The melody was simple, but within it lived centuries of memory. Alaric felt something stir deep within his chest. Not pride, not even joy, but belonging. The kind that anchors you quietly without asking for permission. He glanced at Brenner, who was watching him with calm satisfaction. "It's done," the old man said. "You've entered the chain. From this day forward, what you know will never die with you." As the chant faded, Mistress Edda stepped forward carrying a bowl of honey. She dipped her finger and touched it lightly to Alaric's forehead. "For sweetness of speech," she said, "so that what you pass on will be received with kindness." Then Mistress Hildra pressed a thumbprint of clay over the honey. "For permanence," she whispered, "so your words endure the weather." And finally Mistress Lyra released a small sigh of wind into the circle, the cloths around her wrists fluttering. "For breath," she said, "because no voice lives without air." When it was done, Brenner spoke once more. This is how we keep the world from forgetting itself. Each generation adds a line, a song, a craft. Together they form the chain, unbroken since the first fires burned beneath this valley. The villagers bowed their heads, then slowly dispersed, leaving behind only the sound of crackling embers and the faint jingling of the bells. Brenner rested a hand on Alaric's shoulder. "You'll teach next year's apprentice," he said. "Already?" Alaric asked, startled. "That's how remembering begins," Brenner said. "Not when you learn, but when you share." They walked home through the quiet snow. The thread around Alaric's wrist glowed faintly in the dim light, a heartbeat woven in silk. For the first time he felt not like a visitor to Hollow Vale, but part of its pulse. That night, as he drifted toward sleep, the song of the village echoed in his mind, endless, tender, and unafraid of silence. And in the space between breaths, he realized something simple and profound. Every memory kept alive by love becomes a kind of immortality. The morning after the chain of voices dawned golden and quiet. The storm clouds had drifted far beyond the valley, and the air was full of the scent of wood smoke, beeswax, and thawing soil. The village stirred slowly, as if reluctant to wake from a shared dream. Alaric rose before sunrise. The red thread Brenner had tied around his wrist the day before still gleamed faintly in the dawn light. When he touched it, it felt warm, pulsing softly as though it held a living heartbeat. Today was the final part of the remembering, not of words nor of song, but of touch. Brenner had called it the memory of hands. When Alaric reached the village square, the elder oak stood bathed in early light. Around it, long wooden tables had been set, covered with tools, vessels, cloths, and stones. Every craft of the valley was represented. The potters had brought their clay, the beekeepers their wax, the glassmaker his shards of color that caught the morning sun. The air was filled with quiet conversation, the soft scrape of wood, and the rhythmic tap of tools. No singing this time, only the sounds of making, steady, patient, alive. Brenner approached, carrying a small wooden box. "Today," he said, "you'll learn how memory passes without words." He opened the box to reveal several objects: a hammer, a reed flute, a small stone knife. Each of these, he explained, has been touched by dozens of hands across generations. Every dent, every shine, every smooth edge is a record. He handed the flute to Alaric. The wood was warm, darkened by age. "Feel it," Brenner said. "Don't think, just hold." Alaric ran his fingers along its length. The surface was worn where countless fingers had pressed, the wood slightly hollowed where lips had touched. He imagined the faces of those who had played it, children, travelers, dreamers, all gone now, yet somehow still present. "It feels alive," he whispered. Brenner nodded. "That's because it remembers being used. Every motion leaves a mark deeper than words." He gestured toward the crowd. "Watch them." The potter's wheel spun slowly nearby, Mistress Hildra's hands guiding a lump of clay into shape. The beekeeper was sealing jars of honey with melted wax, her gestures steady and sure. Mistress Lyra hung strips of dyed cloth in the morning breeze, testing the wind. Even the children helped, weaving small bundles of herbs, shaping candles, carrying water. Every movement seemed to fit together, a language of rhythm and repetition. No one gave orders, no one spoke loudly. Yet the work flowed in perfect harmony, as if the village itself moved through a single pair of hands. Brenner leaned close. "When we make together, memory becomes action. The remembering doesn't end when the songs fade. It continues in this, in practice, in muscle, in touch." He picked up a stone tool from the table and pressed it into Alaric's palm. "This is older than I am. Older than the oak even. It's been used to carve, cut, mend, and build. When you use it, you're speaking with every hand that came before." Alaric gripped the stone, feeling its weight. The edges fit his fingers perfectly, as though shaped for him, or by him in another time. Nearby, Mistress Rosewind bent a branch of hawthorn into a ring and passed it to a young girl. "Take it," she said gently. "The shape will teach your hands the measure of patience." Mistress Etta, the beekeeper, handed her apprentice a honeycomb still glistening with golden light. "Feel how the bees build," she murmured. "Perfect hexagons, not learned but remembered." Even the glassmaker, Master Corin, stood among them, holding a shard of blue glass to the sunlight. "Every imperfection," he said softly to his pupil, "tells a story of breath, not mistake. Remember that." Alaric realized then that no one here worked for themselves alone. Every gesture connected backward and forward, one unbroken sequence of touch. The air shimmered with it, a silent chain of continuity. Brenner placed a hand on his shoulder. Now it's your turn. What will your hands remember? Alaric hesitated, then reached for the clay bowl he had made weeks ago in Mistress Hildra's workshop. Its spiral symbol caught the light. He dipped his fingers into the ash jar Dunrick had given him and brushed a faint line across the bowl's rim. The gray mark shimmered, then settled into the surface, a permanent trace. He whispered, "Fire remembers. So do we." Brenner smiled. "Then your hands have joined the story." The rest of the day passed in soft rhythm, the sound of creation echoing through the square like distant music. When the sun began to set, every villager placed one finished object beneath the elder oak. Clay, glass, wax, wood, a mosaic of their crafts glowing in the fading light. No words were spoken. No songs were sung. Only the warmth of hands passing tools, the quiet nods, the shared knowing. As the first stars appeared, Brenner spoke quietly beside him. "Do you see now? Memory is not only what we tell. It's what we do, what we shape, what we leave behind for another to touch." Alaric looked at his hands, rougher now, marked with soot, clay, and wax. For the first time they felt truly his. Not because of what they had made, but because of what they carried. That night, as he lay near the hearth, the scent of beeswax and clay still clinging to his skin, he realized something that would stay with him all his life. Words fade, but the work of hands, that endures in silence, long after the last voice has gone quiet. By midwinter the days grew short again. The valley lay under a pale sky, its colors muted like an old tapestry. Smoke drifted from the cottages in thin, steady lines. The nights were long, long enough that even the stars seemed weary of shining. One evening, as the sun slid behind the ridge, Brenner handed Alaric a lantern. Its flame was small and steady, barely more than a glow. "Take this," he said. "You're to spend the night with Mistress Thea, the keeper of night fires. She'll show you the art of keeping light alive when the world wishes to swallow it." They followed the frozen path through the outer hedges, where frost sparkled on every branch. At the far edge of the village stood a small hut built of dark stone. Smoke rose from its chimney, glowing faintly red against the dusk. Mistress Thea met them at the door. She was a tall woman with silver hair braided over one shoulder, her eyes reflecting the firelight like polished amber. "So this is the apprentice," she said, voice low but warm. "He's young enough to think fire is simple." Brenner smiled. "He's learned to start it, to shape it, and to cool it. But not yet to hide it." Thea nodded. "Then tonight, he'll learn that light must sometimes learn to be unseen." Inside the hut was dim. A single ember glowed in the hearth, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Alaric expected her to add kindling, but Thea only knelt beside it, shielding the ember with her hands. "Watch," she whispered. She blew softly. The ember brightened, then faded again. Too much breath and it dies. Too little and it forgets how to live. Balance is patience. She reached into a small box and withdrew something wrapped in cloth, a small coal from the previous night's fire. "We never start new fires here," she said. "We borrow from yesterday." She placed the coal beside the ember and covered both with dry moss. The faintest wisp of smoke curled upward. Then, a flicker, a spark, and the hearth breathed again. The room warmed instantly, the shadows retreating. Alaric watched in silence. Thea smiled faintly. "Most think fire is a hunger. It's not. It's a listener. It answers only those who speak gently." Brenner settled near the wall, nodding. He's seen the fire of work, the fire of learning, the fire of celebration, but not the fire of waiting. "Waiting?" Alaric asked. Thea pointed to the hearth. That ember slept all day, half forgotten, but it remembered just enough to wake. Some fires live in silence longer than others. That's what keeps villages alive through the dark months. She rose and motioned for Alaric to follow her outside. The night had fallen completely, the air cold and sharp. Across the fields, small glimmers marked the homes of the villagers, faint lights flickering like constellations fallen to earth. "Each light you see," Thea said softly, "comes from another's hearth. We share them through the winter. If one house's flame dies, we carry a coal from another. That way no home ever stays dark for long. No one is forgotten." They stood together in silence, watching the lights tremble in the cold air. Alaric noticed that some glowed brightly, others barely visible. "And if all went out?" he asked quietly. Thea turned to him, eyes kind but serious. "Then we begin again. But it hasn't happened in living memory. The chain of light is older than any of us." She led him to a small iron brazier outside her hut. Inside it burned a flame unlike any he had seen. Blue at the base, white at the tips, calm and unwavering. "This," she said, "is the night fire. It's never allowed to grow large, never left to die. It must be invisible from the road, unseen by those who would covet it, untouched by those who would waste it." Alaric leaned closer, feeling its warmth. It was gentle, almost human. "Why hide it?" Thea's smile was sad. "Because not all light is meant to be shared with everyone at once. Some truths, some memories, some fires, must stay quiet to endure. Hidden light still warms." She handed him a small metal cup filled with oil. "Feed it." He poured slowly, watching the flame swell slightly, then returned to stillness. "Good," she said. "Now you've kept a night fire. Remember, it doesn't need to blaze to survive. Strength can live in whispers." They returned indoors. Brenner was dozing lightly, the hearth behind him glowing soft and steady. Thea poured Alaric a cup of warm milk infused with honey and ash. "Drink," she said. "It helps you carry the day's heat into your dreams." As he sipped, she spoke again, her voice like the fading firelight. "You've seen how we preserve knowledge, through words, through work, through breath. But light is different. Light remembers us when we're gone. That's why we guard it, not for ourselves, but for those who'll walk this valley when our names are dust." Outside, the night fire flickered once, as if in acknowledgement. Later, when Alaric lay beside the hearth, he watched the final embers fade into deep red. They did not die, they rested. And in that silence, he understood what Thea meant. Even in darkness, something small always remembers how to glow. The frost melted slower these days, as if winter itself hesitated to leave. Mornings were pale, the sky like linen washed thin by time. The air carried a quiet that made every footstep sound like memory. It was on one such morning that Brenner said, "You've learned to listen, to keep, and to kindle. Now you'll learn to find. But not with your eyes." He led Alaric toward the northern ridge, where the forest pressed thick against the edge of the valley. They followed no trail, just a direction. Brenner's pace was unhurried, steady, guided by something Alaric couldn't see. After a while, he asked softly, "Do you know where we are?" Alaric glanced around, trees, moss, scattered stones. "Somewhere north of Hollow Vale," he guessed. Brenner smiled faintly. "That's what the eyes say. But what do your other senses tell you?" Alaric hesitated. The forest was still, yet alive in subtle ways. He closed his eyes, trying to listen. There, the faint trickle of running water, the whistle of wind through branches, the sweet, damp scent of lichen. "There's a stream to the west," he said slowly. "And open ground somewhere ahead." "Good," Brenner said. "You're beginning to read the map that isn't written." They walked in silence for a while longer, until the ground dipped slightly. The sound of flowing water grew louder. Brenner knelt, brushed away fallen leaves, and revealed a small stone carved with a spiral. Alaric frowned. "I thought the villagers never marked the forest." "They don't," Brenner said. "Nature does. The stones mark what we remember, not what we own. Each spiral is a voice left behind, a reminder to listen." He touched the stone lightly. "This one says, 2 rivers meet here when the world is quiet. You can't see it now, but when the rains come, the second stream returns. If you trust the land's memory, you'll never be lost." They crossed the shallow stream and entered a denser part of the forest. The light changed, softer, greener, carrying the faint scent of resin. Alaric noticed how Brenner tilted his head slightly as they walked, as if following a sound only he could hear. "What are you listening for?" Alaric asked. "For direction," Brenner said simply. "Sound bends around the world. It tells you what lies beyond the next rise. The forest speaks differently on each side of a hill, each valley, each type of tree. Once you know its dialect, you can travel with your eyes closed." He stopped, picked up a small handful of soil, and crumbled it between his fingers. "Smell this." Alaric obeyed. The scent was rich, earthy, wet, faintly metallic. "Clay beneath the surface," Brenner said. "We're close to a spring. Clay remembers water. Always follow the scent of what remembers." They reached a clearing soon after, a small, round meadow surrounded by birch. The grass was flattened in a spiral pattern, not by feet but by wind. "Here," Brenner said, "is where we teach the apprentices to walk without map or compass. Close your eyes." Alaric obeyed. The forest seemed to breathe around him. "Now," Brenner continued, "walk until you think you've reached the edge of the clearing." Alaric hesitated, then stepped forward. He felt the soft resistance of grass under his boots, heard his own breathing, the distant hum of insects. The air changed, cooler, sharper. He stopped. "Good," Brenner said. "You're at the boundary. You felt it before you saw it. The world changes texture at its edges, sound, scent, even the way air moves. You only need to notice." He paused. "Do you know why we practice this? So we don't get lost?" Alaric offered. Brenner shook his head gently. "No, because someday you will. Everyone does, in forest, in life, in memory. The skill isn't in never losing your way. It's in remembering how to listen when you do." They sat for a while beneath the birches. The air smelled faintly of sap and frost. "There are paths," Brenner said quietly, "that never appear on any map, trails that exist only when someone remembers to walk them. When the last person forgets, the path dies. Every generation must redraw the world through its senses." Alaric thought of the villagers' songs, the children's games, the memory of hands. "So even the land has a memory." Brenner smiled. "The land is memory. We just move through it like whispers through a dream." They began their journey home as the sun lowered, casting golden light through the trees. Alaric realized he could almost feel the village before seeing it. The faint change in air, the comforting hum of distant voices, the scent of wood smoke. Brenner looked at him knowingly. "You hear it now, don't you?" "Yes," Alaric said softly. "The valley has a sound of its own." "It does," Brenner replied. "And one day so will you." That night, Alaric sat outside his home long after the lamps were extinguished. The wind whispered through the hedges, carrying fragments of sound from far away, the clatter of a door, the bleat of a goat, the faint rhythm of a hammer in the dark. Each noise, once meaningless, now felt like part of a hidden map, a constellation of sound connecting everything that lived. He closed his eyes and listened. The world spoke, not in words but in presence. And somewhere deep inside, something ancient answered back. It began on the coldest morning of the season, a day so still that even the smoke from the chimneys rose straight into the sky like threads that refused to sway. The snow on the hedges glowed faintly blue under the dawn light, and the air had that biting purity that made every breath feel like glass. Alaric had risen early to tend the hearth when he noticed something strange through the frost-covered window. A second sun shimmered above the ridge, pale, distant, yet unmistakably real. Two circles of light hung over the valley like twin eyes watching the earth wake. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. Still there. Two suns. Moments later, voices rose outside. Doors opened, boots crunched through the snow. The villagers gathered in the square, pointing skyward in hushed awe. Some knelt and crossed themselves. Others simply stared, faces washed in gold. Brenner arrived soon after, his cloak dusted white. His expression was calm, but his eyes reflected the twin lights above. "It's happened again," he murmured. "Again?" Alaric asked. "Long ago when I was a boy. The elders called it the Winter of Two Suns. It's not a miracle, but a memory." He led Alaric away from the crowd toward the ridge where the snow lay untouched. "Come. You'll see more clearly from higher ground." They climbed in silence, the snow crunching rhythmically beneath their boots. From the crest, the view widened. The entire valley spread beneath them, bathed in doubled light. One sun shone fierce and golden. The other, fainter, hovered like a reflection in the frozen air. "It's the sky remembering itself," Brenner said quietly. Alaric frowned. "You mean a reflection? Like light on water?" "In part," Brenner replied. "The elders taught that ice in the air bends the sun's voice, splitting it into two. But the meaning lies not in the science, it lies in the seeing. The second sun reminds us that truth can exist twice, once in the world and once in our minds." They stood watching in silence as the light rippled across the valley, catching on the frozen river, scattering from the rooftops like spilled gold. The air shimmered with it, alive with a brightness that made even shadows seem to glow. Brenner's voice was barely above a whisper. "The villagers will tell stories tonight. They'll call it a sign, good or bad depending on what their hearts need. But remember this, sometimes what looks divine is simply the world showing us how little we truly see. Alaric nodded slowly. So, the second sun isn't real? Brenner smiled faintly. It's real enough to change the day. Isn't that enough? They descended toward the river, where the villagers had gathered again. Children laughed, chasing their doubled shadows on the snow. Mistress Etta stood with her hands folded, murmuring a prayer. Even those who claimed disbelief couldn't quite hide the awe on their faces. Alaric watched the reflections ripple across the ice and wondered how many other truths the world held that appeared only when the air was right, when the cold, the light, and the watcher's heart aligned. By midday, the second sun began to fade, dissolving into the brightness of its twin. The sky returned to one clear, steady light. People sighed, relieved perhaps, or disappointed that wonder could be so brief. That evening, as the villagers shared bread and ale by the fire, Brenner told the story again. He spoke of the time decades ago when two suns had last appeared and how, in that year, Hollow Vale endured both the hardest frost and the richest harvest in memory. Perhaps, he said, the second sun appears not to bless or curse, but to remind us that everything, even light, carries its opposite. Alaric listened, feeling the warmth of the hearth on his face. So the valley remembers too, he said softly. Yes, Brenner replied. The valley remembers everything, storms, songs, and even its own illusions. We think memory belongs to the mind, but it belongs to the world. Each reflection, each echo, is a kind of recollection. He turned to Alaric with that familiar half-smile. And now that you've seen it, the two suns live in you as well. That's how memory grows, not in books or words, but in eyes that have witnessed something worth keeping. Later that night, long after the fire had dimmed, Alaric stepped outside. The snow glowed faintly in the moonlight. The second sun was gone, but he could still sense its afterimage, not in the sky but behind his eyelids, a soft ghost of brightness that refused to fade. He closed his eyes, and in the dark warmth behind them, two circles of light still lingered, one for the world, one for the memory. And in that quiet space between illusion and truth, he understood. Some things disappear to remind us how deeply we once saw them. Spring came hesitantly that year. The snow withdrew like an old guest reluctant to leave, and the thaw turned the rivers restless. The valley exhaled, softly at first, then with life. Buds appeared along the hedges, birdsong returned to the forest edges, and smoke from the hearths carried the scent of wet earth. Yet one place in Hollow Vale remained frozen, the lake at the valley's center. Even as the days warmed, its surface stayed dull and hard, sealed beneath a thin sheet of pale ice that refused to melt. One afternoon, Brenner asked Alaric to walk with him to the lake's edge. The air was cool and the sky trembled with reflected light. "You've learned how sound travels through the forest," Brenner said. "Now you'll hear how it travels through silence." They stopped where the reeds bowed low over the ice. The wind moved faintly across the surface, humming a note so low it was more felt than heard. Brenner closed his eyes. "Do you hear it?" Alaric strained to listen. "Only the wind." Brenner smiled. "That's what most think. But beneath the lake lies something older than our village. A bell that once called the valley to prayer before the flood swallowed it." "A bell?" Alaric asked, glancing toward the opaque ice. "Yes," Brenner said. "Centuries ago this was the site of an abbey. When the great flood came, the monks fled, but the bell tower fell into the water. Some say the bell still rings when the world remembers." Alaric frowned slightly. "You mean when the wind moves the ice just right?" Brenner chuckled softly. "That's the simple way to put it. But ask yourself, what is a memory if not the air moving through something that once mattered?" They stood in silence. The faint hum deepened, almost like the resonance of distant metal. A vibration rippled through the soles of Alaric's boots. It might have been imagination, but it felt real enough to still his breath. "The lake holds more than water," Brenner said quietly. "It holds echoes. Every sound ever made near it has passed through its surface and stayed." He knelt, pressed his palm to the ice, and gestured for Alaric to do the same. The cold burned against his skin, but beneath it something pulsed, slow, deliberate, ancient. "Do you feel that?" Brenner whispered. "That's the world remembering." For a long moment neither spoke. Then, faintly, a sound rose, low and mournful, like a voice caught in the distance between wind and water. A single resonant tone that lingered and faded, leaving the valley suddenly still. Alaric's eyes widened. That was real. Brenner nodded. The bell of Hollow Vale. It rings only for those who listen without expecting to hear. They remained by the shore until the sun dipped behind the hills. The lake caught its light, turning gold for a heartbeat before darkening again. When they finally turned to go, Alaric glanced back once more. The surface of the ice rippled faintly, not from the wind, but as if something beneath had stirred. That night he couldn't sleep. The sound of the bell haunted him, not frightening but insistent, like an unfinished thought. He rose quietly and stepped outside. The moon hung low over the valley, painting everything in silver. He followed the narrow path back to the lake. The ice had begun to melt, revealing patches of dark water that mirrored the stars. Alaric stood at the edge, heart steady, breath visible. "If you can hear me," he said softly, "what do you remember?" The night answered with silence. But then, a ripple and the faintest chime, as if some hidden metal deep below had answered his question. It lasted only a moment, but it filled the air like a promise. He smiled faintly, whispering to the water, "I'll remember you too." In the morning, Brenner found him by the shore, still sitting cross-legged, his reflection doubled in the thawing water. "You went alone," Brenner said quietly. "I had to," Alaric replied. It felt as if the bell was calling. Brenner nodded. "And what did it say?" "That nothing is truly gone," Alaric said. "Only waiting beneath the surface." Brenner's gaze softened. "Then you've learned the lesson. The world keeps what we think it's lost. It hides its memories in water, stone, and air. We only need the patience to listen until they rise again." As they walked home, the sound of dripping thaw filled the valley, hundreds of tiny notes striking the earth in rhythm. Each droplet seemed to echo the bell's tone, smaller but no less true. Later, when the villagers spoke of that winter, they said they too had heard something on the lake that night, a single clear chime that made the hair on their arms stand on end. Some called it a ghost, others a blessing. But Alaric knew better. It wasn't a haunting, it was remembering. And as he drifted into sleep that night, he dreamed of a bell shining quietly beneath the surface, its voice neither gone nor broken, only resting in the depths until someone cared enough to listen again. The thaw came quietly that year, as if afraid to disturb the memory of winter. The ground softened, the stream sang again, and the wind carried the scent of soil waking from long sleep. Alaric followed Brenner through a meadow washed with pale green. The air shimmered faintly with morning mist, and in the distance, a stand of trees gleamed silver gold under the rising sun. "Where are we going?" Alaric asked. "To the oldest orchard in the valley," Brenner replied. "The trees there remember more than any elder." As they approached, Alaric saw that these were no ordinary fruit trees. Their trunks twisted with age, their bark thick and ridged like folded cloth. Some leaned toward each other as though whispering secrets. Others bent low, heavy with buds despite their gnarled limbs. At the orchard's edge stood Mistress Iwan, the keeper of trees. She was small and weathered, her face like parchment left in the sun too long, but her eyes sparkled with the mischief of someone who had never quite grown old inside. "So," she said as they drew near, "you've brought me another listener." Brenner nodded. "He's learned to hear fire, water, and wind, but not wood." Mistress Iwan smiled. "Ah, then he's half-deaf still." She motioned for Alaric to follow her between the rows of trees. The ground beneath them was soft, spongy with moss and last year's fallen leaves. The air was sweet, filled with the faint buzz of awakening bees. "These trees," she said, resting a hand on a trunk, "were planted by the founders of Hollow Vale. Each family tended one and passed its care down through generations. The fruit fed them, the shade sheltered them, and in return, they whispered their stories into the bark." Alaric tilted his head, listening. The orchard was full of small sounds, the creak of branches, the flutter of wings, the sigh of wind through leaves not yet grown. "I don't hear words," he said. Mistress Iwan chuckled softly. "Of course not. They don't speak like we do. They breathe memories. You have to let them breathe through you." She guided his hand to the trunk of an apple tree whose bark glowed faintly green under the sunlight. "Close your eyes," she instructed. "Breathe in then out. Slowly." He obeyed. The wood was cool beneath his palm, its surface rough but pulsing faintly with life. The scent was sweet, sap and soil and time. At first he felt nothing but the texture beneath his skin. Then gradually a rhythm emerged, soft, irregular like a slow heartbeat. Images drifted behind his eyes, children running between blossoms, hands pruning branches, laughter in the sunlight. He opened his eyes, startled. "I saw them," he whispered. "People. From before." Mistress Iwan smiled knowingly. "The orchard remembers every hand that's ever touched it. When you listen well enough, it shows you what it cherishes." They walked deeper among the trees. Some bore signs of age, hollows carved by time, moss-covered scars where branches once were. Mistress Iwan paused before one such tree, its trunk split nearly in two. "This one lost its heart in the storm of '83, she said softly. "But we filled the wound with honey and wax, and still it blooms each spring. Even broken things remember how to heal." She turned to Alaric. "That's the lesson of the orchard. Memory isn't just keeping what was. It's the act of becoming again." Brenner picked a fallen branch and examined it. Each ring inside tells a year's story. Drought, flood, peace, war, all marked quietly beneath the bark. He handed it to Alaric. "If you split it wrong, you destroy the story. But if you polish it, the years shine through." Alaric traced the lines with his finger, marveling at the perfect circles. Each one a season survived. "It's like time itself has a heartbeat," he said. "Exactly," Mistress Iwan replied. "And we are part of it. Every breath we take becomes a ring somewhere." As the morning deepened, she led them to the center of the orchard where a single massive pear tree stood, older than any building in Hollow Vale. Its roots bulged from the soil like sleeping serpents. "This is the mother tree," she said reverently. "When a villager dies, a handful of their ashes are buried near her roots. She remembers them in her blossoms." Alaric knelt, touched the trunk, and felt a deep vibration, not sound but presence. A calmness filled him, as if 100 voices were breathing in unison. He understood then that remembrance wasn't about holding on, it was about allowing the past to live through what still grows. Mistress Iwan's voice drifted like wind through leaves. "One day, when your own hands have tended many things, a tree will remember you too." When they left the orchard, the sunlight had shifted, pouring gold through the branches. Alaric glanced back once more. The trees swayed gently, and for a moment, he could have sworn he heard faint laughter, the echo of lives folded into bark. That night, the smell of blossoms lingered in his dreams. And though he slept deeply, part of him remained awake, listening to the quiet pulse of roots beneath the earth, carrying the memory of everyone who had ever loved enough to plant something that would outlive them. The path to the forge wound between fields and river, the air thick with the scent of iron and early rain. Even before Alaric reached the low stone building, he could hear the rhythmic pulse of hammer against anvil, steady, deliberate, like a heart that refused to tire. Master Garan, the village blacksmith, was a man carved by his own craft. His arms were thick as tree trunks, his beard streaked with silver and ash. He seldom spoke, yet the whole valley depended on him, for hinges, plows, nails, and tools that bound their lives together. When Brenner brought Alaric to the forge, the old man looked up only briefly. "He listens?" he asked. Brenner smiled. "Better every day." "Then he may stay," Garan said, turning back to his work. "But he will not speak." The rule held from the moment Alaric stepped inside. The forge glowed red at its center, light flickering across the walls like living fire. The air tasted of smoke and heat. Every sound, the hiss of bellows, the clang of hammer, the whisper of cooling metal, seemed part of a great language older than words. Garan handed him a piece of iron cold and black. "Hold it," he said. "This is silence made solid." Alaric frowned. Silence. The blacksmith met his gaze. "All strength begins in stillness. You'll see." He thrust the iron into the fire. The orange glow spread slowly across its surface until it pulsed like a sleeping heart. Then Garan lifted it with his tongs and struck once, a clean ringing note that filled the room. "Listen," he said. Each strike after that carried its own tone, high, low, sharp, dull, a pattern so deliberate it felt like music. Garan worked without haste, his movements measured and calm. Sweat rolled down his arms, hissing when it met the anvil. Alaric watched, mesmerized. He began to realize that the hammer's rhythm wasn't random. It rose, fell, paused, like breath. The metal sang back, reshaping itself with each note. After a long silence, Garan spoke. "Metal remembers heat the way men remember pain. You can't force it, only guide it." He handed Alaric the hammer. Strike. The weight felt awkward in his hands. He hit too hard and the iron spat sparks. Garan stopped him with a raised hand. Too much. You're shouting at it. Alaric tried again, softer this time. The sound came out dull. Garan shook his head. Too little. It won't listen. He guided Alaric's grip, adjusting the angle, the rhythm. Between strength and gentleness lies truth. That's where the sound lives. They worked together for hours. Alaric's arms ached, his palms blistered, but the rhythm began to settle into him. The hammer and anvil became an echo of his own heartbeat. When he finally struck just right, the sound rang pure, a bright tone that seemed to hang in the air long after the hammer fell. Garan smiled faintly. There. You found its voice. He gestured to the glowing iron. Every piece of metal holds a secret shape, waiting for the right listener. We don't make things. We release what was hidden. When the iron cooled, they plunged it into water. Steam roared upward, filling the forge with the smell of earth and lightning. Garan watched it rise, his face illuminated by red and blue light. Do you know why we temper metal in water? He asked. To make it strong, Alaric said. Yes, Garan replied, but not just that. The sudden change teaches the metal to remember contrast. Fire and cold, expansion and restraint. The same lesson applies to us. He turned the finished blade in his hands, its edge gleaming faintly. Strength isn't how hard you strike, but how long you endure the silence between strikes. The rest of the afternoon passed with few words. The forge's song became steady, hypnotic. Alaric began to sense when to strike without being told, to feel the shift in tone that meant the metal was ready. The rhythm took hold of him, and for a moment, time disappeared. When at last